Hi, this is Melanie Dawn, and this is Dawn of Wisdom. Good morning. Today is Monday, and I want to talk about vulnerability. Vulnerability. It allows us to share those things which have hurt us. Feel compassion in the act of sharing. Vulnerability allows us to experience new avenues of thought. It's powerful. Vulnerability is putting yourself out there. That is what I try to do. I try to do that with this podcast. I love it. It feels free. Vulnerability is not a weakness. It is a strength. It is powerful. Vulnerability is the courage to show up for yourself. Everyone is vulnerable, but not everyone has the courage to show up. It is scary. It was very scary for me most of my life. Being vulnerable has saved my life, learning to be vulnerable. We feel fear. We feel weak. We feel hurt, shame. We feel unworthy. Vulnerability requires a shift in awareness in order to strengthen our emotional well-being. Brene-Brown says it really good. Vulnerability is an act of courage because you merge with yourself, your true self, instead of hiding behind a false self to appease others. I love that. I hid myself for many years. I pretended to be someone I was not, just to be accepted by others. And I look back and it was a false self. Being vulnerable was very scary for me. I acted tough when I felt weak. I acted brave when I was afraid. I pretended I was in control when I had no control. Or I should say I felt powerless. No one really knew me. I did not know myself. Rumi has a saying, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Wow, that's very powerful. I'm going to read it again. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. We must become aware of our pain. We need to explore our pain so we can be vulnerable, and then we can work with it. We need to be gentle with ourselves. We need to embrace our pain so we can move through it to vulnerability. Let's talk about being vulnerable. Our personality is developed at a young age. We become guarded. We dismiss fear, anger, unworthiness, etc. Being vulnerable can be terrifying. So we become funny. We make jokes. We do anything to avoid that vulnerability. We pretend. We fear judgment. We fear rejection. We fear appearing weak, losing power. To be vulnerable takes strength. It's very freeing. This is me. This is who I am. This is how I feel. It does wonders for your self-esteem when you allow yourself to be vulnerable. Here are a few ways of being more vulnerable, or a practice in learning. Be willing to say I love you. Do things for yourself without feeling selfish. We need self-care. This is not selfish. It's the opposite. We learn to be more vulnerable to ourselves, and we are able to love more, be kinder, honest. We suffer because we learn to love ourselves, which is the key. The key. I'm going to read that again because I think I said suffer instead of soften. We're able to love more, be kinder, honest. We soften because we learn to love ourselves, which is the key. I am a believer of self-care first. Asking for help. This is where I struggle. I am safe alone, and asking for help scares me. So I'm always aware of this. Asking someone's opinion. I've come a long way with this. I love to hear someone else's opinion I now understand everyone has a story. Sharing my opinion, I'm not afraid to share my thoughts, even if they are crazy to others. Remember, being vulnerable allows us to be open, to change. Being vulnerable allows us to understand new perspectives. Vulnerability is necessary for successful therapy. We have to be vulnerable to our therapist. Vulnerability builds intimacy by allowing people to see you. I want to go a little more into this. Have you ever wondered why you might have a hard time making friends? It might be because of the fear of being vulnerable. Developing close friendships requires vulnerability. Otherwise, they remain acquaintances. We get closer to people by learning more about them. If it is hard for you to be close to someone, as it was for me for many years, consider talking to a professional, talking to someone who is trained to help work through your issues, to be more vulnerable. At the end of the day, we want nothing more in life than to be ourselves. That is the feeling we are all wanting. That joy that comes from not having to pretend. We call it authentic. Vulnerability is that state of being authentic. It's real. It's powerful. We can't fake it, or we have the opposite reaction. We know when we are real, and we know when we are fake. We know it. We have to be open and available to other people in order for them to be open and available to us. Vulnerability is sharing and connecting because you want to, because it feels good. Sincere, it means being emotionally exposed. What are the right connections for vulnerability? Share a story about yourself. Vulnerability responds to vulnerability. If you want vulnerability, you need to give vulnerability. Understand your motivations. Ask yourself why you're engaging. When our vulnerability comes with an agenda, it's not authentic. Let's be honest about being vulnerable. We need to be vulnerable to learn and to be ourselves, to create connection, to feel less isolated, and to own and explore ourselves. We need to be more vulnerable to become more self-aware. Self-awareness is essential. We must be open and vulnerable with ourselves. First, must be kind when learning about ourselves. Vulnerability is not just with others. Vulnerability is learning yourself, being authentic. If practice, it has a way of developing. It develops on its own, growing over time. Define vulnerability for yourself. What does it mean to you? Look into your past. What was being vulnerable to you? Get to know yourself. Is it music, yoga, writing, meditation? Find a safe place to explore what vulnerability means to you. Get comfortable with your vulnerability. Get comfortable with the feeling of being vulnerable. Feel your feelings. Feeling your feelings, good or bad, instead of numbing them, feel them. As you get used to the sensations, you increase your capacity for vulnerability. It's amazing. It all starts with you. You have the power to change. No one can do it for you. It's you. Being vulnerable is all about self-awareness. Take responsibility for your thoughts. It is the key to vulnerability. When willing to take responsibility, it cracks open any defenses we may have. You are willing to allow others to see the whole of you. It's beautiful. It's practice, practice, practice. Becoming more vulnerable takes practice. When we put ourselves out there in an authentic way, the fear of rejection will melt away. Befriend yourself. Be gentle with yourself. I highly recommend inner child work. Inner child work gets you down into that little girl or boy that felt unsafe and scared and fearful, and allows you to be more vulnerable. It allows you to see yourself and to see the true part of who you are. Thanks, you guys, for listening. I hope that this helped you. You can always contact me, Dawn of Wisdom, one word, on Instagram. I'd love to chat with you. Let me know what you think about vulnerability. I think it saves us. I think when we allow our authentic self to come out and we're more vulnerable, good, bad, or the ugly, whatever you think it is, if we embrace it, we hug it, we hold it, we cradle it, we ask why, it fades away. It'll always come back up because it's been in us for so long, but it's less and less as we grow and become self-aware. All right, you guys, you have a great week. Thank you very much. Tons of love.